Hello, everyone. Welcome to America Meditating Radio in collaboration with The Next Normal. Yes, the meditation museums are still closed. I have no idea what to do, where to start, where to go. Things are, in a way, I think, teaching maybe me and many of us what we just have no more control over except the way we choose to feel. There are things that have become a gift as a result of this particular time, maybe the gift of more communication with family, intimacy with family, and maybe old friends have become new, maybe enemies have become friends, maybe friends have become enemies. I don't know. But a lot of things have changed in the last year and a half. And I hope that we too have changed. Change is the inevitable, no matter how much you cut it, dice it, sink it, cook it, swirl it, we're going to change. I was sharing with my friend Sousan, who's going to be joining us soon, that my relocation and move has been revealing to me a different side of me that I wasn't even aware. I'm not like settled inside myself, and I'm so accustomed to being in charge with how I feel and how I show up for me, not for anyone else. And I found myself going, well, who's this new person? I don't even know who this person is. I don't like this person that's coming up. But spirituality, life teaches us that whoever's coming up is going to be good and it's going to be of service to you. The topic that we're going to explore today is a really hard one. Maybe one of the good things about this pandemic is that sex trafficking and some of these organized businesses that used to take place have kind of lost a lot of money. Things have changed, at least I would say maybe a year ago, or 6 months after the pandemic really hit full throttle. It had reduced tremendously. And just imagine how many lives kind of was put on hold and saved for a little bit. This is my thought. But of course, as things are opening up and people are feeling like they're going back to normal, we're really back where we were. What I'm witnessing in Israel, in Palestine, in India, in Thailand, in Kenya, you say to yourself, what's going on in the world? Haven't we learned? No, we haven't, because if you haven't been taking care of the soul, then if life situations or circumstances outside of you aren't in order in the way that you want it, then however you have been inside is going to reveal itself. So if I'm not in that place of really amplifying myself, my spiritual integrity, my ability to feel comfortable in my skin, then even though I want something to work and I want something to be in order, my spiritual vibration won't let it happen if I haven't served the deepest part of me. So what do you get? You get greed, you get rage, you get anger, you get hate, you get lust. And if we keep feeding it over and over and over again, it gets stronger than the original spiritual quality of the soul that we really are. And perhaps it has to get worse. It has to get worse until somehow the soul just surrenders and says, I give up. I give in. I just want to be a good person. The work that our guest is doing is to invite people to being better people. And she's working in an area where people are not their best at all, whether it's the victim or the oppressor. No one's in their best state. So let me give you a little introduction of who she is. Dr. Sousan Abadian is an Iranian-born scholar who's passionate about enhancing human capabilities and well-being. She's an independent practice teaching, speaking, and consulting internationally on leadership, collective trauma, and personal, social, and cultural change. Dr. Abadian earned a PhD in political economy and government from Harvard University, an MPA in international development from Harvard's Kennedy School, and an MA in anthropology of social change and development, also from Harvard University. She's the author of 2 forthcoming books, Free Me to Love, When is Consent Not Consent? Dr. Abadian previously served as a Franklin Fellow at the U.S. State Department's Office of International Religious Freedom. I love that facility, by the way. Her portfolio included preventing violent extremism, gender-based violence, rights of religious minorities in the Middle East and South Asia, and restoration of people and cultures following atrocities. Please welcome Dr. Sousan Abadian to America Meditating and Next Normal. So glad that you could join us today. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you, thank you,
Oh,
thank you, thank you.
thank you. What a wonderful introduction, Sister Jenna. And I'm so grateful to be here. It's actually such a privilege. And I'm so want to honor you for the work you're doing, even with all the dislocation that you've been undergoing. I mean, oh, bless you, God, what a challenge. And so grateful to have this opportunity to share my work with you and other people. So thank you for inviting me to be here today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You must tell me why George Washington is behind you.
Oh, it's actually not George Washington. It's
Oh, Ben
Benjamin
Franklin.
Franklin, who I love. He's one of he's my favorite founding father. I just love that he was a polymath and he was interested in both spiritual things and science. And he was kind of a first self-help person. You know, he wrote these short self-help things for people, and he just felt to me like this unlimited man.
Wow.
And you know, even till he was older, he was doing things. So that's sort of how I see myself. I want to be, you know, never retired, constantly moving, growing, learning, sharing, you know. So that's he this painting, actually the original, is in the White House, and I was very privileged to have been in the White House at one point when during President Obama's administration, and got to see this painting, and I loved it. So I got one made, you know, a copy made for myself here. So
I
he's a
love that.
reminder.
I didn't even know that Ben Franklin had some spiritual tenets about him. I'm happy to hear that. I'm going to do some more research on him for sure.
He was more of a universalist.
I love
And
that.
apparently at his funeral, people from many different faiths came. All the various faiths came, Muslims and Jews and Christians, and you
Wow.
know, so he was open and also native. He was very open to native spirituality in some ways. So that's what I understand about him. But
It's so
I might have
beautiful.
made that last piece up, but I hope that was the case. But I think he
It's so
was.
beautiful.
Yeah,
Suzanne, you know, the world's going through a lot of changes and we are changing. I won't say the world is changing and I'm not changing. I'm changing, so the world is reflecting my changes, right? And
yes,
so perhaps we're changing from an area of maybe feeling really so uncomfortable with ourselves now that it can't be hidden. So there bombing strikes, there's hate, there's division, there's prejudice, there's so much of that because we've been maybe feeding those emotions for way too long. And now it's just saying, okay, let me show you full-fledged what you've been up to. As a toddler, you had a near-death experience, and I don't know how much a toddler can remember what that was like, but I'm
yeah.
sure the recording is in the soul. But I would love to start our time together to talk about, you know, how that you felt like it impacted your life from that particular, beginning.
You know, you're the first person to ask me that question, so I really appreciate that. Well, up until now, I've been on podcasts and things that weren't necessarily spiritual. So this is my coming out into the world in a different way. So I this is the first for me in a way.
Good.
So I didn't really remember a lot about that experience until I was adult. I was told about that experience a little bit by my mother, but it was when I started meditating and doing all sorts of other spiritual practices when I was probably in my early 30s that memory started to bubble up. And at one point, one teacher did I guess, hypnotic regression of some sort. And I flipped back into that space of what it was like to pull up above my body and watch myself. And I actually didn't. I remember at the time when I had this experience, I pulled out of my body, watching everything that's going, and I was actually gleeful that I was out of my body, and I didn't want to go back. I remembered very clearly that it was too painful for me to be on Earth, and I had these two guardians with me, and I'm not going back. I didn't know what I was getting into, you know, and I was negotiating like, I can't do this anymore. And they were like, nope, you have to go back. This is the whole point. You're supposed to learn about pain on Earth. This is your work, and you're going to find a way through it. And I think, I can't do this. I had no idea what it was going to be like on Earth when I agreed to this. But anyway, obviously I got pulled back in, and the effect it had on me. And I remember, by the way, when I had that experience meditating, I remember at the time I had not done much personal development work at that point, or healing. I'm thinking, why was I not wanting to come back on earth? I had this image that I had this idyllic childhood and everything was so perfect. And I usually wear rose colored glasses anyway. So my tendency isn't to look at pain and suffering. So I couldn't understand it until I actually ended up doing the work on
Mm,
myself and on
mm,
on digging up what was so hard for me. But I think the impact it had on me is that I I also recognized later in life that on some level I hadn't fully inhabited my body, that I didn't feel safe on earth. And so part of me has always been a little bit removed from me. I I
yeah.
I didn't feel myself in my physical body. And so again, I did a lot of work, tantric work, other things that brought me back into my body. And then I had to deal with the pain of being in there and the fear of being in here. So I've had to work through a lot of that. But
Wow.
it wasn't something I remembered from childhood. It was something I dissociated from.
Right, right. But the memory sits in the soul. It's interesting. I just lost a very close friend, another one, due to COVID in
Oh,
India.
I'm so
And
sorry. Oh,
during her funeral, we did a memorial service just a few days ago, and she was a well-known celebrity in India. I just felt her dancing, and I could feel her thoughts going, "Oh, Sister Jenna, this is what you used to teach me, that I'm a soul and
oh,
I'm not the body." And you're
yes.
right. Oh my gosh, if we could only be so conscious when we're in the body, we'll be free, we'll be dance. And this is all the thought I kept picking up from her, that she was
Mm,
so happy. Yes, she
yes.
had her three kids that she left behind, but she said their souls, they'll be fine, they'll be happy.
Yes.
And I could pick up all of that. And I
Oh,
feel that one of the things actually the world needs now is a remembrance, a return, an experience of the soul, of the soul.
absolutely.
Like, I think everybody needs a near death experience to get back to their humanity, because there's so much happening. Now, I also came to find out that you had a really, really special relationship with your father, who was a World Bank economist. How did that relationship with your dad impact you? For me, my dad was like, he was so detached and so, proper and nice that I don't know. I just never felt like I had a very deep bond with him. And yet I felt that, wouldn't it have been great or special if I did?
Oh, yeah. Well, whatever he did right, because you're perfect.
Maybe
I wouldn't
because
want
he
you to
was
be
so
any other way than
detached.
you are. So you've turned out beautifully. Uh, I think, when I think back, I think that I came to Earth to be with my dad, actually. Like, he's the one who drew me in a way. I mean, maybe I changed that story, but that's the story I have at the moment. Um, I may start to cry, so forgive me. He's passed away a couple years ago, but I feel him around, but I still miss him a lot. And we spent a lot of time apart from each other, and he was very detached in some ways too, meaning that his whole life was about service. In some ways, he was more focused on helping other people's children than he was in some ways his own
Mm,
children. I mean, but what a model about service that he was. He was an incredible, generous man, and he just honored the feminine. So he went from just a young child. He loved the feminine. You know, his whole work was about empowering women, basically girls and women. So all that he gave me, all that passion. I mean, we would sit. I'd come home from school. He'd come back from work, and dinners were about conversations about rural electrification and how that was helpful to children who could then read in the Filipino villages and the Indonesian. I mean, we were talking about those sorts of things from a young age. And so he modeled service. He was also very humble, and he was not a World Bank official who sat in the capital when he would travel, sat in the capital city. And he went into the villages, talked to people. He actually grew up in India part of his life. He was Iranian, but spent formative years in India. So he was influenced by Gandhi. He was there at the tail end of India's independence movement. So Gandhi was like his big teacher,
mentor. Mm,
and so that's what I grew up around. And he was also very allowing. A lot of Iranian men are controlling. I hate to say that, forgive me, but the way they parent, the way they do things, a lot of authoritarian kind of, and he was not,
I
his
think that's
father was like
cultural
that.
though, isn't it?
It
It's like we
is.
almost can't blame the Iranian men, the Indian men, the Chinese men, the African men, the Spanish men. It's like there's like a cultural norm. It's only, I think, the Europeans and, when you come like to the Europe or America, there's like an attempt to leverage these gender relationships, but
Well, but that's also new in Europe. Let's just be real. I
true.
mean,
That's
this is
true
not
too.
the way Europe was. Germany was awful at one point. It was very
That's
patriarchal,
true.
which is why
That's
we had
true.
Hitler. I mean, this is about evolution, right? And so my dad was the change in his family system. That was extraordinary about him. He chose to be different, like Gandhi chose to be different. And he was different as a father and how he modeled things. He didn't force us into anything. It was always allowing our spiritual development. I mean, I don't know if you read the book Free Me to Love, but I talk about kind of my forays into different spiritual things. He was curious, but he was also, he questioned me just with questions. He didn't say, you can't do that, you shouldn't do this, it was just open. He was just open. And just by asking and trusting me, I evolved. And I think that's what and he was, the other thing my dad did, which I think was extraordinary. You've gotten me on a topic I don't get to talk very often about, but I think this was really exceptional about him, and kind of like this wonderful guy behind me, Benjamin Franklin. He was unlimited in some ways. He grew. He lost his father really young. He came out of a minority community that was very disadvantaged, and he built himself from nothing. Came to the United States, got a job in the World Bank. I mean, he was extraordinary. And whenever I wanted to do something, he would say to me, Sousan, he would say, what do you want to do? And don't let money be the
Yes.
limit. Anything. What do you want to do? And so he planted this unlimitedness into my being. I mean, I still, like, at moments now that he's gone, I think, okay, now I've got to
Wow.
like really live this. But you know, but he was like that. And I appreciate, and also he was exploring. He was always curious and learning and exploring and growing. And I remember waking up early one morning and he was doing yoga, and he was trying different things. And, he just this open-minded man who was both an economist, but also open and exploring. And nothing was out of, I remember dragging him at one point, but I didn't drag him. I was curious about past life regression work. And
Mm,
he came along with me. I think he was probably 60 something and he was curious.
I love
So,
that.
that he was sort of a companion in that way.
I
And I
love
really
that.
appreciated that. Oh, if I may add one more thing that was extraordinary about him. My siblings would attest to this. He was Zoroastrian by birth, but he, like Gandhi, he was open to lots of faiths. So whenever we passed a church, he would cross himself. And he also, and us kids, we would make fun of him when we were younger. What are you doing? And you know, and he would fast for Ramadan, for example. And he just wanted to convey respect for different faiths. And he just embodied that for us. And he was this global citizen, universal person, global, the world is my family kind of person. So
Love it.
that's how he influenced me, because I think I tried to take up some of those qualities. Of course, my mother's influenced me as well in great ways, and we can talk about
Of
that, but
course, of
she's
course.
also a different kind of influence.
It's
So that was my
interesting to
father.
it's interesting to witness the legacy our parents leave in us, and
Yes.
here you are in an area doing work that can be very painful to witness, whether it's cultural or collective. I mean, one of the things that you've been exploring and a pioneer in is the collective trauma, or the collective trauma and the cultural traumas that we're witnessing. India is revealing to the world something that I don't think they ever wanted to even face as a nation: the way they treat their poor and
Mm.
underprivileged. And for the world to see that, it's like, if you speak to middle or upper middle class, they're like, yeah. But when you show it to the whole world, they'll be like, wow, there's got to be a better way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're learning about cultural norms that we are so accustomed to might not necessarily be the best. And what do we do to change from that? There's a saying, you can take the man out of the country, but it's not so easy to take the country out of the man. So could you talk about this, the collective trauma that we witness and the cultural traumas that we endure, and realize it's okay, it's fine to do that. It's fine to do it. My parents did it, my auntie did it, this one did it. It's not, it's criminal. It's criminal
Yeah.
when anyone experiences suffering and pain from the hands of another person.
Oh, for sure. Yes, absolutely. Obviously, India is not unique, right? Many of us, many countries, many peoples have not treated the vulnerable in the best of ways. And I think of my work as a continuation of my father's. My father, I did study economics, and my father was a development economist and worked with the most vulnerable. And I did that in the beginning of my career, but I became interested because I was also like, why aren't we making breakthroughs? Why are certain communities stuck, seemingly stuck? And that's how I got interested in trauma. I didn't originally, I wasn't originally interested in trauma, but it's what came up. I couldn't deny what I was seeing, and I was probably more open to seeing it than other people. Maybe that's what these guides, when I had my near-death experience, told me, is that I was here to see the pain and the suffering and to label it. And the label I gave it was trauma, and it was pretty obvious that it was that. But economists weren't seeing it, political scientists weren't seeing it. So the doctoral dissertation I ended up writing was a dissertation on the role of trauma in economic underdevelopment and also political underdevelopment. Why communities were stuck in cycles of violence and poverty that had to rooted in histories of collective trauma that were, had them stuck in stories. Basically, it's a lot of being stuck in stories about limitation and about lack.
Why was everyone so stuck? Is it all about economy?
It isn't all about economy. I mean, in part, sometimes we can inject money and things into a system, and nothing changes,
Yes.
right? I mean, have you ever loaned money to someone who you wanted to help and nothing changed? I've done
Yeah.
that plenty. I mean, they ended up blowing the money, coming back for more, wanting more. I mean, it's not that you shouldn't help, but something else in addition to the money has to be done. And so some of that is self, it's not that complicated, actually. It's a sense of not being worthy, or being a victim, not feeling empowered to do things, not thinking you have the capacity. I mean, you've got to give people opportunity. Obviously, you've got to give, access to resources and education, but that's not necessarily enough. You can do those things, and some communities still stay stuck in cycles of violence and cycles of poverty. So what else is going on? And it's at the level of being socialized into certain
Yes.
feeling of not being good enough, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore creating out of that sense of oneself. So I'm grossly simplifying this, right? I've written hundreds and hundreds of pages about this, but it's a very important thing. And cultural trauma. So there are different kinds of collective traumas. You can have a trauma like we're going through the pandemic, but it's relatively short term. It may or may not affect our value system. It may or may not affect the way we raise our children. But there are traumas that peoples go through that actually damage them long term in how they raise children, how they tell their histories. And those are the more severe forms of collective trauma that affect the culture. And so in the case of indigenous populations or Native American peoples or Aboriginal communities, First Nations communities, I don't know how many people know about the history of residential boarding schools, but by law in the 1890s, Native children were forcibly removed from families, many of them forcibly removed, and sent to residential boarding schools, mission schools, half of them. They were either run by army or missionaries. And many of these places were emotionally, psychologically, physically, sexually at times abusive. And you imagine, and they were places where these children were sent to basically civilize them. And it was really an effort to take out, change their culture. But it was very damaging. And many of these kids, can you imagine several generations of children having had this experience? The first generation, by the way, 50% didn't come out alive. Like they died of heartbreak and disease and all sorts of things. Imagine first what happens to the families that are left behind, like their children are taken from them. But then imagine these children coming back as like late adolescents, not knowing their language, not respecting their culture, being brainwashed into thinking they were inferior. And then several generations of this. What do you think happens? I mean, why are we surprised that there's an epidemic of substance abuse? Anything to numb the pain, or that there's high suicide rates still. I mean, this is the legacy that we created. I didn't create this, but the settlers populations created, that created cultural damage. So, this is a whole different beast, collective trauma, than what we're experiencing now during the pandemic. I mean, I hate to say, but there are different kinds of collective traumas, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
so that collective trauma requires a different kind of intervention than this one right now. But some of the things are the same. The collective trauma that actually damages culture, like slavery, like
Yeah.
what the Native peoples experienced, requires cultural restoration and cultural renewal. So I have a
Tell me a
whole,
little bit about that. So let's say there's what would be one of the first steps for that cultural renewal, especially where slavery is concerned and knowing the history that we've seen with African Americans. What would be the first step that either as an African American should make, or even somebody who's Caucasian American? I mean, there are two people, both groups have to put in some kind of effort, Sousan.
absolutely.
It's not even just one side.
Well, it's all of us. I mean,
Yeah,
every one of us has to look
yeah.
at how we are both oppressor and victim. I mean, all of us. The trick is to break out of the whole victim, perpetrator, and then savior. It's a triangle. The shamans I've worked with talk about that. So to take step out of that story altogether, that we're not victim, we're not perpetrator, and we're not savior. That we're sovereign beings. So many of us are caught in the victim, and if we're victim, then we're going to be perpetrators. It may not be, we might be perpetrators in our own family systems. We may not be able to, for African, I'm a man who has been racially, discriminated against, may come home and be a perpetrator in his household towards his wife and children, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you've got to break out of the whole dynamic. So there's a lot of you have to look at yourself and take full responsibility. I mean,
Which
I
is
think there's a lot
hard.
of,
Which is hard.
believe me, I know I've been doing this now myself for 30 years, right? And it's constant. Um, it's constant taking responsibility. It's not just that. Obviously, we've got to change the structural discrimination and the policy. We've got to change all those things as well. I mean, all of that is given. We've got to change the ways people are discriminated, but
I,
the
no,
individual work has to be done too.
I found that in situations that I'm uncomfortable with, like, moving from I was in McLean, Virginia for so many years, and now I'm in Centerville, Virginia, and it's a whole
Oh, you're so
different.
close.
Am
I'm in
I?
Vienna.
Oh my God! I'm bringing
I
my
just
little
passed by you
puppy.
yesterday.
I'm taking our little puppy to her spa treatment in Vienna tomorrow.
We
So
should meet for
anyway,
lunch.
it's like, as I go through this big shift inside, I find that when I go in and I check that I'm not feeling so great, and I'm saying this because of what you've said, that I would say one of the most important questions anyone should ask themselves if they ever feel victimized is, why am I feeling this, or how am I feeling? To really begin to start to work with you for your own healing and feeling, because we're the only
Yes,
ones in charge of the way we want to feel. Situations, structures, systems, spouses, circumstances, they all might be in a mess. Okay, that's a fact. But at the end of the day, am I not the one that can choose to feel
yes,
the way I need to feel? And I think that's one of the hardest assignments. You've got your upcoming book, When is Consent Not Consent? It addresses genital mutilation and cutting and the call for cultural renewal. What is the role of intergenerational trauma? You've touched a little bit on it, but in the continuation of practices such as genital mutilation, I forgot who that model was that was working on helping to
yes.
end that in Somalia. Remember
I
her?
know who you're talking about. She's, yes,
She was
amazing,
the UN
courageous
ambassador
woman.
as well
Yeah.
to that, right?
She's got an
And
amazing organization. Yeah.
I can't imagine that culture would exist, that you would close up a young girl's private parts, and then when she gets married, you would open that up. And when I think about it, I go, why would you do that? And then I
Yeah.
keep wondering, why is it that society has not created some kind of a rehabilitation for souls in male bodies? I just don't understand. I've never heard of a girl going to rape a guy. I just don't hear it. And I'm just like, when do we start to
Yeah.
have this conversation for men to really begin to do some rehabilitation inside of their spirits?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sister Jenna, may I just, I want to go back to the last, just to
Yes,
add
yes,
one
I'm
thing, because
sorry if I
and then
cut in.
I'm gonna no, just 2 seconds, because
Yes.
I want to say that I was looking up on my phone because I have this on my phone. There's something called emotional emancipation circles that
Mhm.
are set up for I think African American communities, but they may be for all communities. But it sounds amazing. So anyone interested in that kind of healing work, these emotional emancipation circles would be, I think, a great place to start. You asked where to start. That would be a great place to start.
Beautiful, beautiful.
So then shift to female genital mutilation, which is a whole different topic
For your
altogether.
book, in your upcoming book,
Yes,
This Consent, Not
yes,
Consent. Yeah.
um, yes. The book. Why? So what's interesting about female genital mutilation, and I hate to use interesting because it's something that has haunted me for, uh, let's say I'm aging myself now, but 40 years. I've been thinking about this for 40 years. So this book is a culmination of 40 years of thinking about and working on this topic. But there are people who argue that it's not just men, that this is work, that this is something, a practice that women do to women do to girls, that it's sanctioned by women.
Yes.
And so as a result, who are we to say it's their culture? Women are choosing this. This is why I have what one is consent, not consent. Like, women are choosing this. So who are we, white people or brown people like me or whatever? Who are we to say they shouldn't do this? For you? This is their human right and their freedom, right?
Mhm.
So this is what I'm calling righteous inaction. People who are arguing for righteous inaction. And then there's the people who argue for righteous action, which is, oh my God, this is so evil, this is so awful. They're doing this, they're doing that, and this is righteous action. And I'm advocating for not righteous inaction, which is it's their culture, they have a right to do whatever they want, and it's their choice. And I'm arguing against righteous action. I'm arguing for compassionate action, which is really, you know, humble, because we have stuff in our own cultures. All of our cultures have stuff, is, it's harder to see within our own systems, right? We have child abuse here. We have all sorts of things we do here, right? I mean, so it's not like we somehow are superior or different from. It's just that we can see, like they can see ours, we can see theirs. This practice is, it's unnecessary. For it's adding suffering. I mean, perhaps that's my take on it. The book that I wrote is arguing that. So what are the stories that we have about, why this is necessary? And, so it's not just, I just want to point out, this isn't just about men, right, having to rehabilitate themselves. These are women, the women who are cutting the girls, women who are offering their children to do this. There was a woman in Kenya just recently, a doctor, a Kenyan doctor, who took this to court, that female genital mutilation is illegal, and she was saying women who are adults should be able to practice this if they want. Fortunately, just recently, the Kenyan courts said no, it's still illegal. But she was arguing that it should be an adult's choice to be cut or not. So, and of course, there are different variations in cutting and sewing and everything. I mean, there's lots of a lot of stuff going on. But I think we need to not come from judgment, right? But from conversation and
I,
then
I don't
action.
I don't even think it's coming from judgment. I think it's coming from me is
Sadness.
it's so painful,
Yeah,
and
it's
these
sadness. Yeah.
girls are so young, and you see yourself in that place, and you're like, oh, I can. And I think that even though it's women, the mothers, the grandmothers, the chief women of the village are taking these young girls to do that, it's because of the men, though. And
It
that
is.
I would
It
say
is.
that brainwashing, that
It is.
cultural norms, that this is what's needed, that's why would they do that, Suzanne,
Well,
if it wasn't.
to some extent, you're right. I mean, you're right, but they're also caught in this narrative of this is what it is to be a good woman, right? And some of that's the men, but some of that's them. I mean, we can blame men a lot. We have the reasons why we're justified in blaming men,
I'm
but
not
sometimes
blaming them. I'm wanting there to be a conversation where we can all sit at the table and have a heartfelt discussion and say, honestly, um, we love you, but can we somehow find a way to understand what our needs are instead of it always being forced on us, or
yes,
that you have to do the cooking, you have to do that, or
absolutely, absolutely.
your vagina has to be mutilated and blah, blah, blah. No, it doesn't.
Well,
It doesn't.
you'd be very happy to hear the last part of the book is about various interventions. And there's one intervention that I really love. It's called the Grandmother's Project. And it's not just grandmothers, but primarily focused on grandmothers and empowering grandmothers. But it's really a conversation with grandmothers and grandfathers, the elders, exactly what you're saying. These conversations that raise the consciousness of this, and they become the change agents in their community because they're actually the most influential, right?
Right.
So they end up changing things, but you have the conversation with the elders who've usually the ones who are the most seem to be the most stuck in their ways. But in this case, the grandmothers project is changing the way um, they're seeing this issue, and so they're actually becoming more effective in how the culture is changing in these communities that are have this project going in. So you're absolutely right, and we do need to have this conversation with the elders, with the men and the women, and and I mean, patriarchy is really at the key, is at the heart of a lot of the stuff that's oppressing both women and men,
Right.
and we need to figure out. And it's based, to me, I, I, it's been hard for me to admit, I didn't, I wanted to be this, very serious woman who was an economist and taken seriously in the world. But really, it's so simple. It's like men and women, their relationship, how we raise our children. I mean, it's back to these basic things like that determines everything. Like, I don't care what else. How are you raising your kids? And what is the relationship like between the parents and the elders? And it's so simple.
It's
Is
so
there community
simple.
that supports them properly? I mean,
It's so
that's just it.
simple.
Everything,
The
all this
cure
thing. I mean,
is so
it's
simple.
but we have
And
to value it, right? We got to value
and
children and the
and
women. And
I don't know. Earlier before we got live, I told you about this contractor. I don't know if I told the contractor, but I inherited a contractor that somehow wasn't thoughtful about the fact that he left our house uninhabitable. And
oh gosh.
it was just not even in his
Ah,
thinking that how we would we navigate living in a space like this. And the part that got to many of us was that I had paid him for the job ahead of time because I
oh
just
my.
trusted him, and
Yeah.
I wanted him to feel that I believe in him, and I believed that he would have the place ready in time. Long story short, I was observing my feelings and
Yeah.
frustration transforming. And so when he would want to reach out or something, I felt that I wasn't the angel that I needed to be to communicate with him. And so I found myself going, that's what it is with everyone else, you know. There is a feeling that you're holding in your heart for someone. And even though the person might have done wrong by you, you're doing wrong by you by holding that negative feeling for the person.
Yeah.
And why it all seems so complicated, Suzanne, where it's like, why isn't the world in a better place? We have enough money, resources, intelligence, freedom, and yet the feelings in souls have become so traumatized with anger, with a sense of loss, grief,
Yes.
abandonment, shame, guilt, that as souls, we don't know what to do to get rid of that feeling. And you know what? It's almost traditional and cultural because we've been
Yes.
carrying on with these emotions and feelings for lifetimes after lifetimes, and
Exactly.
no one's addressing it. And
Well, this is our generation to do it, right? I
that's
mean,
why I
this is the
think
first time
meditation
in
and
human
spirituality is so important. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, I think that's what we've come here to do, and we're finally at a time that I mean, awareness is the first key, right? To become aware. And you're so right that it's in everything that you said, and that we're carrying not just our own stuff, that we're carrying. Was my experience in the book that I wrote, Free Me to Love, is all about this. It's freeing myself from not just my own. I mean,
Right.
these are shackles we've carried through the generations that we're finally able to do something about. And as we heal ourselves, we heal the generations behind us, but also the future generations. I'm about to be grandmother in September, and I don't want my grandson to be carrying this one more generation. I mean, it stops. Like, as much as I can, I'm going to clean up my act so that this does not go forward. And I think that's the commitment we have to make, right? To love our children and grandchildren better than we've been loved.
Could you say that again? There's something that you said that once you free yourself from that hurt or whatever that is, you're actually freeing the generations behind you of that. Could you go a little bit more in that? Because that was really deep. When you talk about freeing me to love and you are letting go of all that stuff and you're doing the work now, you do. You leave behind you this legacy for everyone to see and witness what it's like to live free of trauma. I love that.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little more on that, please?
Well, just that we have inherited stories
Yeah.
including stories about our identity, right? Who we think we are. Like I am this, and I am this, discriminated community, and I'm blah blah blah. And this is these are the generational stories that we also carry that are uh, hurtful in some ways and
Yeah.
limiting.
Yeah.
So as we free ourselves from these stories of limitation of who we think we are, um, we think that we are loyal to our ancestors by holding on to their anger, holding on, but they actually want to be free. They're like cheering us, please free yourself. Let us be free. Free yourself from this. They're waiting for us to free ourselves. They want us free. They don't want us holding on to their grudges and rage and whatever. I don't think so. I think they want us to heal it, meaning let go and step into the new of what's possible for us now, the unlimitedness of it. And free, and we free those generations. I think there is no sense of time is all happening at once, so we free, the whole system goes up and down, transforms. I mean, that's the belief I have, that's what I've been taught, and I feel it actually. So even a past life, people who believe in past lives, it's not past, it's happening. And so as we heal, even now we heal elements in those lifetimes. We're at the cutting edge. We're finally we're at a time in human history where we are beginning to understand trauma and its effects and impact, and we can heal it. But it means we have to be careful because trauma is seductive, right?
Yeah.
Trauma itself can be an identity. So I'm a traumatized person, I'm a traumatized this. And so it's a really fine line of not being seduced by it, but
Mhm.
doing the work, feeling, releasing, the heartbreak. I mean, you were hurt by someone who you felt betrayed by, your contractor. I mean, you gave him this completely open heart, and it hurt, and that needs to be acknowledged. But it needs, you want to acknowledge it and honor it, but you don't want to get attached to it, right? So that's the trick, to the both and.
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge. And as you do so, you free all the generations, including the ones
Indeed.
going forward,
Indeed. Beautiful.
including the perpetrator. I mean, we
Yeah.
don't want to heal the perpetrator necessarily, but as we step out of the victim, we do. We don't, we cut this energetic tie with the perpetrator, and the
Yeah.
perpetrator's free to change identity as well. That's part of the generosity, is to allow the perpetrator also to change.
I love that. I love that. I really enjoyed our chat together. I can't believe we're at the end of our conversation. We've got to come back and do a part two. Is there any sort of a virtual book talks that you've got coming up? Is there a website that you can leave our listeners with that they can actually learn more about your work and participate in some of your journey?
Well, thank you for asking. And I do have a website. It's www.sousan, Sousan. It's Susan with an O. I stuck the O in there in college. Sousan Abadian, Abadian @.com. And if you go on there and sign up for my newsletter, I will let you know of upcoming things and when my books get published. So I'd love to share more with all of you. Thank you.
Dr. Sousan Abadian, thank you so much. It's been a delight having you on here today.
Thank you, Sister Jenna.
Thank you. All right, everyone. I mean, look at the work that Suzanne has done and really go into this conversation today. I think it's really important. If you listen to it over and over again, because I'm replaying it even as I'm talking to you, there were so many nuggets to help for some kind of a transformation. So I hope that something that was shared today helped you to, I don't know, emerge into a better version of yourself. That's why I do the show quite regularly. I want to emerge into a better version. And when I look at you or speak with you, I want you to be the same. I want you to feel the value and the beauty of life. I don't want you to make this time pass you by and you end up just realizing that, you wasted so much time. You wasted so much time. So as much as there is a lot of maybe, not such good stories in our humanity, there's also a lot of good stories. There are a lot of good stories. And we need to start to amplify those, share those, remember them, so that we can move into the future where, as Suzanne was saying, you heal yourself in this life and in this incarnation, then you leave a legacy behind that nobody even knows what hurt is anymore. I mean, I think that's fantastic. And maybe that's really what it is. That's what it is. Thank you for joining us today.
Amen.
Remember, no one can take away your happiness unless you give them permission. And we really are here to practice loving each other the same. Take care, be well, all the best.